We are here back on the line and so excited to be talking from, learning from, and getting to know someone whose work has been super impactful for both of us. Folks, we got John Perkins here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yay.
Perkins. That's our first crowd chant that we've had.
Even with one person,
Yeah.
And I'm not running for president. No matter what you say, I'm not running for president.
We'll add you to the long list of
we wouldn't
people
talk to
who are
you if
not
you
running
were.
for president. I know we have a lot to get to, but because of the nature of your work and the nature of your shirt, I think we have to do something very important, which is, you heard some animal noises thrown in there welcoming you to the show. And Damon has an impression that I think is really important that we gather here on the record.
You ready for it? All right. This is my large jungle cat. I think it could apply to jaguar, but
What do you think on a scale of 1 to 10?
I love it. I'd run when I heard that sound. I got to show you what's on my screensaver, though. I don't know whether I hope you can see this.
Mm-hmm.
I was swimming in a river. So I just got back from the Amazon a couple of weeks. I was there for almost 3 weeks and got back about a week and a half ago. And that big cat, full-grown male jaguar, was swimming across a river that I was kayaking in. And I came around this bend and I nearly hit him. And I actually had to backpedal not to hit this jaguar. And this was a couple of years ago. It was the same week that my book Touching the Jaguar came out in the United States. And here I am in the Amazon, practically hitting one with a kayak. So it seemed very appropriate. They're beautiful animals. And yes, Damon, you are one.
Thank you. I love imagining the jaguar like not in attack mode, but just like in northeastern traffic mode. Like, hey, I'm swimming over here. Watch your paddle. Keep it moving. I'm going this way.
Yeah, and you see their tracks in the jungle often, and they may be only a few minutes old, but it's very hard to see a jaguar because they don't want to be seen. They don't attack people unless they have some good reason to. Like being hit by a kayak might
a kayak paddle.
That might be a reason, So one of the few places where you get to see them is when they're swimming across the river. They're water cats. They love water. They love to fish. They dive. They fish. And when they're in the river, they can't get away from you, but you want to stay away from them.
Yeah, touching the jaguar might remain a metaphor, or at least a mystical experience.
Yes. You want to. That might have been a way to shapeshift into a jaguar.
So I want to start with a 2-part question that we start. It's a bit of a ritual for us, and it's centered around time. However you define this time, this hour, this day, this season, this lifetime. How is the world treating you, and how are you treating the world?
Well, I love being alive. I love every minute. And the older I get, the more I appreciate every minute. So, I mentioned that I just came from about 3 weeks deep in the Amazon, and then several days hiking at over 7,000 feet in the Andes. I was perfectly healthy. I came back home. I was watching television 3 nights after I got home, and my heart starts racing, and I ended up going to a hospital and having a pacemaker, an operation, several operations in 24 hours. And that was in the last week. In fact, I was operated on a week from day after tomorrow. It hasn't been that long. I'm doing great. But it really made me realize how incredibly magical the universe is. Because here is deep in the Amazon. The only way you get to where I was is small planes and then dugout canoes. It's quite a trip. And to have had this happen to me there would have been rather difficult, to say the least.
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't be talking with you. And it waited until I get back here, which was, beautiful timing, but also it was amazing to get this feeling of how integrated I am with the universe. And now my heart is integrated with this amazing computer that's working with it. So the miracle of science combined with the miracle of life and the miracle of the human body And I really see this as a metaphor because we all, I think, are struggling these days with what is AI? What is, how do we integrate technology with this incredible world we live in? And frankly, I'm a great example. I've got this huge, tiny piece of huge technology
Yeah.
here in my heart, and it's working closely with my heart. And it waited until I got out of the jungle and off that high altitude where you might have expected things to go wrong, hiking strenuously at high altitudes and deep in the jungle, and waited till I was watching TV close to a hospital where they could they could put this miraculous technology inside me. And I got to say, I've had many experiences like this, and it's deeply spiritual for me.
Mm.
I really feel this incredible connection with creation. I turned 80 in a few months, and
Oh, congratulations.
yeah, thanks. And I'm very active, and I will be. I got to slow down for a few weeks while this thing settles in. But
No, you were 7,000 feet elevation active. That's what we're talking about here.
yeah, yeah. And um, I realize that this is just such a magical universe that we live in. I don't fear death at all because I don't believe in death. I believe in the decomposition of this particular body, but the soul and the spirit goes on, and I'm very spiritual in that way. I mean, the word spiritual has some strange connotations for different people, but
Yeah.
I just feel so deeply connected to
We could go there. We could
the
talk about.
jaguar. The jaguar. The jaguar. I feel connected to you too. And I've got two cats, one of which is named Jaggy for jaguar because she looks and behaves a little bit like a jaguar, and I feel deeply connected with them and with all the trees and with all the plants, and it's just an amazing world we live in, and to love every single moment and realize that every moment is unique. This very moment is never going to happen again.
Yeah.
It's magical and wonderful.
I'm enjoying starting here. This part of the pool is really warm as a way to get into the waters of this conversation, because as we kind of unpack your work, but really more of like the impact or implications of the contribution of your work, I'm sure there has to have been a spiritual component kind of as a thread going through. I've heard you tell a story kind of similar or parallel to this pacemaker story of when you were young in the Peace Corps and fell ill, and like a shaman had to see you before you almost were not going to make it, and then you had this whole shift of energy that like allowed you to survive this jungle exploration, and that being kind of the beginning of your story, and like you being able to reflect on it now. I'm seeing some like parallel in that, and I want to use this like notion of spiritual connection to transition to something I've heard you mention a lot about, this global consciousness revolution. And what I feel, and you can, add addendum or correct, what I feel that your work has been striving to do is to name this harmful, death-making way in which our political economy works around the planet as a way to invite and or provoke folks into this shift of revolution towards a life-based regenerative system. And if that feels accurate, I'm curious how you have seen your work contribute to this global revolution over this past 10 to 15 years that you've, been in the public space talking about your experience.
Well, Dan, I think the simple answer is that there'd be no revolution if it weren't for me.
Just quoting a long list of shitty humans who said that,
Well, thank you.
Great work.
Yeah, in all seriousness, I think there is an amazing consciousness revolution that's going all around the world, and I happen to be in a privileged position to speak at events in many different countries and see this happening on so many levels. It's happening on the philosophical, the scientific, the economic level, and whatever small part I've played in that. There's a few people who've read my books and been impacted, but I have to say that all those people have probably impacted me a lot more than I've impacted them. And I
Mm.
think that we are at this point in time now that has been part of human history forever. I believe that where we're confronted by two forces, and there's many sub forces, but two big forces. One is this force of waking up, of raising consciousness, of realizing that by advocating a system that promotes short-term profits, regardless of the social and environmental costs, and short-term materialistic consumption maximization, and is creating this death economy that is consuming and polluting itself toward extinction. And that's one side, and I grew up with that. I was trained in that. I was trained as an economist to promote that kind of a system. I believed in that system at the beginning. You know, I thought what I was doing as an economic hitman for the first 7 out of the 10 years I did this, I thought I was doing the right thing because it's what's taught in business school. It's what taught, promoted by the World Bank, and everybody else is in that system. At the other side is this consciousness revolution that says, no, we've got to have a life economy, an economic system that pays people to clean up pollution, to harvest all the plastic that's floating around in the oceans and recycle it, to plant trees and to regenerate destroyed environments, to come up with new technologies that we've got solar and wind, which have been a huge improvement. But let's face it, that's just the very low end of the technology so far. I mean, we've got a long way to go to create, but we're on that trajectory of turning things around. And more than anything, it's waking up to the knowledge that it's not about promoting or maximizing short-term profits. It's about maximizing long-term benefits for all life on this planet, not just human life, all life. And yes, businesses have to make some profits, but they don't have to maximize short-term profits. And then back when I first started going to business school, I was taught that a good business executive makes decent rate of return for his investors, but also invests in the people who work for him or her. Pays them good salaries and health insurance and retirement, sets up retirement funds, and takes care of the consumers and the communities where this business operates. If you have an industry in a town, then you help the town to set up recreation centers and education centers, libraries, whatever. And that all changed in the 70s. And we got into this thing that Milton Friedman was a proponent of, maximization of short-term profits. Reagan bought into it, Thatcher, many world leaders. But now we're waking up to the fact that this system doesn't work. We know the glaciers are melting. We know that. We know the oceans are rising. We know there's terrible poverty in the world. We know that the 3 individuals have as much wealth in the United States as half the country. I mean, that's a sick, terrible system. And those 3 individuals don't pay much in terms of taxes, or the corporations don't. We know we've got to change. So you get these two forces, those who are waking up, know they got to change, those who want to convince the rest of us that we don't need to change because they think everything is just perfect. They think that.
Or at least they're projecting the sense that everything's perfect, even while then planning for, scheming on, proposing ways to navigate the effects. And so you named this like historical shift, with the pivot point of neoliberalism and neoconservative, the late 70s, early 80s. And so I want to talk a little bit about these models of corporatism that have mapped across that transition, because what you described of like, there's almost this sense of benevolence that gets talked about of like, building the gymnasium and sponsoring the parade. But, that was happening. What was paying for that was extraction of raw materials if it's a mining town, or extraction of labor if it's an agricultural town. Like, it wasn't that model of like corporate statehood and extraction. While there may have been some sense of responsibility, or at least a demand of responsibility to the workers that was fought for, was still from the taking is what paid for it. And so we have this corporate statehood. And now, post Citizens United, in this era, we have this idea of like corporate personhood. And, many of these companies aren't manufacturing anything and don't have a base and a town where they're like, how could you sponsor the town parade when you don't have a place where your business exists? And so I'm wondering for you, it's a very broad question. Like at this in 2024, when we say a corporation, what do you understand that to even mean at this point? Because the scale of it and the structures of it have shifted so much. So what are we talking about when we talk about corporations and corporatism?
Whew, that's a big one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it's fair to say that we're ruled these days in the United States and much of the world by what I refer to as a corporatocracy, and a lot of economists do. And it's a system where the people who make all the money in corporations, who run the corporations, also end up running government. You know, if you think of the true definition of capitalism as a system where the government doesn't own the means of production or distribution or marketing, they're owned by private individuals, and where there's healthy competition. We don't have that. We don't have true capitalism. We have what we call predatory capitalism. It's not really a form of capitalism. It is true that the government, at least in the United States, doesn't own means of production, but the people who own the means of production own the government. So that doesn't even fit in with the definition. It's
Right.
I mean, let's face it, the people with all the money have a lot more votes than you or I do because they can, they have a tremendous influence on lobbyists and the electoral process and the whole process of getting who becomes a candidate. And we don't have healthy competition for the most part. I mean, it does exist in small towns. Town I live in, it's very healthy competition locally. We have a farmers market. That's true capitalism, And those people are competing with each other. Like there's several farms that sell organic food, and they compete with each other. But they're also friends, and they'll trade off. So if you go to one of them and say, "Hey, I want some organic cucumbers." Well, I want a lot of my cucumbers, but I think Jane over here has cucumbers. Go check with Jane, and they'll do this, and that's healthy, and they're not trying to buy each other out or destroy each other. But we've got a system where that's become prevalent, with this buying out and the trading of paper. Like you mentioned, I mean, the hedge funds, the investment bankers, a lot of the lawyers, and I'm not knocking all my partner's a lawyer. She's a lawyer. She's a good lawyer, but I mean, this whole system of making tremendous amount of money without actually producing anything except paper. It's derivatives. We're in a very, very sad state from that standpoint. But it's the sad states that push us. It's the same, like I had a deep spiritual awakening, as you mentioned, Damon, way back when I was in the Peace Corps and was dying in the Amazon. And I just had another one last week. But my heart rate actually went to 0 at one point. My partner, she was sitting in the room.
Do you plan on going back to the Amazon? Have you got your fill of the Amazon? Or are you
no,
going to keep?
I'm taking a group in January. Yeah, I'm not
Bring a medic.
Well, like I said, I don't believe in death.
I say.
But it's the moments of crises that wake us up. And, I think we've had some great presidents in this country. I think George Washington was a great president. I think Franklin Roosevelt was a great president. We've also had some very bad ones. But the great ones come along at times of extreme crisis. And that's when the change takes place, when you move into new ideas of what it means to run a country. I think we're at one of those times now. I don't know what'll come out of this, because sometimes the bad comes out of it. We saw that with Hitler, and we're seeing it with Putin, I think, and some others. But we are at this time. It's a watershed moment. And it's a tremendous opportunity for those of us to speak out like you do with your programs and your films, to really encourage people to move forward, knowing that we have an incredible opportunity. We are living at a most blessed time because we are at this pivotal moment, another pivotal moment, a big pivotal moment in human history. And we have the opportunity to create something magnificent. And we're being pushed to do it. At the same time, there's the pushback. I've been a martial artist most of my life. I studied martial arts. I was very active, and one of the things you learn is if you're up against a guy who's a lot bigger and stronger than you don't try to overpower him. You got to outmaneuver him. You got to use his energy against him. you know and I think that those of us who are on the edge of this revolution, this consciousness revolution, when we get pushback from the status quo that says, we can't get rid of fossil fuels, we can't do this, we take energy from that like a good martial artist. We throw it back at them. We take energy. We don't get discouraged by it. We don't give up to that. We get inspired by it.
Mm.
I love that. I want to go deeper in talking about what that like counterattack or that yin yang flow can look
Harnessing
like.
of
The harnessing of the energy, and really what I hear in that is the relationship between liberation and resistance and creativity. And I want to, just for our listeners, we're towing a fine line because your story is deep and wide, but we have curiosities we want to get to, so we're not getting through all of your story. But for folks who are not super familiar, and again, correct, this is my synopsis, so jump in if anything sounds inaccurate. You spent about 10 years working as an economist with a firm that was contracted by the U.S. State Department, correct?
State Department, Treasury Department, World Bank. Basically what's called the Washington Consensus.
The Washington Consensus, right? So as a contractor working more or less as an agent of the Washington Consensus of the U.S. state, worked with developing countries, and as outposts of the World Bank and IMF offer these loans. These loans were then collateralized by their natural resources, and basically the message was, sign this and you can maybe build some roads and electric power, or not sign this, and then there are these guys in the room right here who might hurt you and or kill you, and if they don't get to you, will invade and overthrow. It's like the long and short of it. And then obviously most of those resources from those loans went to the aristocracy and the 1% of those developing nations and did not, distribute well. And this caused a lot of harm, a lot of violence, a lot of lack for vulnerable people in the developing world, or we may call it the global South. And so now that you've been telling this testimony for a few decades about what that work was, how insidious it is, and where we need to go, I'm curious what that martial arts resistance harnessing energy looks like in the global South or amongst the oppressed people in some of these so-called developing nations, that we can learn from, that we can uplift, and that we can be in solidarity with. So what has that harnessing look like around the world in relationship to the legacy of this market-based imperialism?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to say, Damon, that that was a great description. Next time I'm asked to give a speech someplace, be on a podcast, I'm going to ask you to take my place and just say, I'm John Perkins. I think you can pass for that, and you can summarize this.
Yeah, I see the resemblance. Cool. I feel good. I can't wait to tell my college roommate this story. Like, yo, remember we was watching that shit on YouTube? Yeah, I talked to the dude and he said I got it. All right, cool.
And I got booked.
Yeah. Irvin, I'm hitting you. All right.
The only thing I would add to your story is that in addition to that 1% of the wealthy in those countries that gets rich off it, so do our corporations, because they're the ones that loans come back to build the infrastructure that helps the rich in those countries, but they also make a big profit off of it. Our big construction companies, the Bechtels and Halliburtons and Brown and Roots and Stone and Websters, et cetera. I think I just, as I mentioned, came from being with these indigenous people in the Amazon that I've known. I've worked with them or their grandparents since 1968, and when I was a Peace Corps volunteer for 3 years there, known them for a long time. And it's again, it goes back to a little bit to this implant I have in my heart, where I think modern technology can be a huge help to them. People sometimes say, well, I can't believe these guys are getting cell phones. That's really sad. Well, it's not sad. It depends on how you use the cell phones. And I think they're using them very wisely in some regards to communicate with each other and be able to be able to post resistance, to organize resistance to oil companies or mining companies that are coming in. And they combine this with a philosophy, and I think this is the most important aspect, that they know that they are a part of nature, not apart from nature.
Mm.
And that to me is the biggest difference, that we define ourselves as apart from nature. We are superior over nature. We can do whatever we damn well want with nature because it can absorb all the abuse that we give it. That's this philosophy.
Yeah.
We can keep raping and pillaging nature, and she'll just
It'll be fine.
succumb. Yeah, she'll be.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they know otherwise. Like, and I think it's important to recognize that we all come from about 200,000 years of ancestors. Every one of us comes from 200,000 years of ancestors who lived a life economy, who knew they were a part of nature. It's only been within the last blink of an eye historically, and that may go back 3,000 years, but that's a blink of the eye in terms of 200,000. And it really, this really took off, as I said, in 1976. I mean, it's been growing. This is not brand new, but it's escalated. It's that hockey stick escalation that we're going through now of really believing that we can control nature. Even that some of the people who are advocating for how to stop climate change or reverse climate change are talking about, industrializing it somehow, throwing chemicals into the ocean or into the atmosphere, or erecting huge shields in the atmosphere to send the sun's rays back to the sun, whatever. And I
That's
think
literally how the Matrix starts.
yeah, yeah, right. That's right. And I think, it goes back to this touching the jaguar. What does this mean? This book I wrote that goes into it. The shamans taught me this when I was apprenticing with shamans and in the Amazon, and that, when we have something that's holding us back, a fear, or maybe it's an excuse, something, we want to believe because I'm making a lot of money, I don't want to believe what I'm doing is wrong. I had that one for a while, but when we touch that jaguar, it gives us the energy to change our perception. And when we change our perception, we change our actions. And when we change our actions, we change reality. So, our reality is molded by our perceptions. And I think that's an incredibly important concept. I think that's what modern psychotherapy is based on. It's what marketing is based on. It's what politics is based on. It's what quantum physics is based on. It's what shamanism is based on. It's true. Our perceptions control our reality, or mold our reality. And when we perceive ourselves as apart from and superior over nature, we give ourselves the license, in fact, even the mandate, to do whatever it takes to maximize profits or materialistic consumption, regardless
To
of,
dominate other people, right? Like,
yeah,
to maintain
if
the
we
domination.
believe that we're dominating the earth, then those who are in charge of that domination will dominate other human beings.
exactly. And when we change that perception, when we touch that jaguar, and the jaguar says, "Oh no, we're not apart from nature. I'm going to show you, all these fires and hurricanes and droughts and storms and melting glaciers and rising oceans. I'm showing you." As a shaman woman one time said, the earth isn't at risk here. We are, and a lot of other species, but we're just like so many fleas. And if we get to be too much of a nuisance, she'll just shake us off. And she's twitching. This is a shaman woman high in the Andes of Ecuador, Quechua speaking. And she said, that volcano above my house there, it had an ice cap on it 20 years ago. And it had for thousands of years. It's gone. Mother Earth is twitching. She's getting ready to shake us off. But she's sending us a strong message. So we're really lucky to be alive right now, where we can listen to that message and do something. And I think that's the big difference that we're looking at. What do the Indigenous people have to teach us? I think more than anything, to understand that we are vulnerable. We are a part of nature. We are not superior over nature. We do not have the right to do whatever we feel we want to do for whatever reason. We need to look out we need to be good stewards. We need to understand that we are a part of and stewards to nature.
And I think the sense of uh, domination that you're describing being the dominant thread of our political and social economy, like, is not. It doesn't naturally continue for people. Like, there's so much projection and posturing and performance in order to keep that alive. I'm thinking about, in your own story, the way that everything from, the hotels and suits and where decisions are made and business, like the creation of this artificial structure that imparts the sense of no, we're the ones who can make decisions about what will happen to other people and the earth, and that if you want to be able to survive, creating this false sense of dependence because of that lack, is from this position of if we don't do all this, this structure will not maintain. They have to work really, really, really hard.
It's a Ponzi scheme
to keep the stilts from collapsing. And so I'm wondering for you, between when you participated in that work to now, you mentioned climate change and the impacts of climate change. I'm thinking about mass migration. I'm thinking about the way that militarism exists now. We're in an era that I feel isn't the narrative is less look at what corporate expansion can make possible for us, and is much more look at the crises that are coming, and you have to rely on us to keep you alive, is the message they're sending. And so I'm wondering, one, does that ring true? And two, how have you seen their strategies evolve, if that is the case? If it's not we can make your lives better, it's we can keep your lives from getting worse.
Yeah, well, that's it depends on what corporation and what business sector. The oil companies look at this differently, and then different oil companies within the oil company system will look at things differently too. And you can say that about pharmaceuticals, big ag, and on down the line. And so it's a very, there's no easy answer to your question. There's no generic.
And I generalized big time, I will acknowledge that for sure.
But it's an appropriate question, and I think what we all need to recognize is that we are all part of that system. It's not them, it's us, and they only thrive because we want them to. So another teaching that comes out of the Amazon is back when I first formed a nonprofit called Pachamama Alliance back about 30 years ago. The indigenous people asked me to form a partnership with them, which became the Pachamama Alliance, which is a partnership between people in what we might call the northern or western world, the industrialized world, with the indigenous people in the Amazon who are trying to save this incredibly important biosphere and this incredibly important part of the world. They had come together, different tribes who'd been warring for hundreds of years, and they were pretty small wars, but they were basically wars over territory. Hunters and gatherers are very jealous of their territory, because you need a lot of land if you're a hunter and gatherer. You need a lot. Jaguars need a lot of land. Humans need even more. And so they've been warring with each other, and then they realized that their neighbors weren't their enemies. The oil companies were their enemies. They saw the oil companies coming in and destroying everything for everybody. And then they understood it isn't the oil companies, it's the people that use oil. And that's when they asked me to form a partnership with the people who they most feared. They said, we need to touch the jaguar, and the jaguar is you. It's your people. It's your philosophy. It isn't you as people. There's nothing wrong with you people, the American people, or whatever, Asian or European or whatever. It's your philosophy. It's your dream of this world where you dominate everything, where you control nature, where you try to control nature. got to change that dream. In other words, we got to change consciousness.
Yeah.
It's all about consciousness, and to recognize that this is a message for all of us. That it isn't about changing the corporations per se. It's about changing what we ask of the corporations. So I want to ask of these corporations, continue to work hard to find energy sources that don't use fossil fuels and that don't ravage the nature to use them. Put your money into how do we make the air give us energy, or water. We know there are systems that can make that happen. H2O and all the so on and so forth. Put your energy into, if we're going to continue to use plastics, let's make sure that we have plastics that, like this research now, I understand there are plastics that have within them a certain microbe that eats them up when they get old. Well, let's just use those kind. I don't know where that technology stands, but also let's recycle all the plastics that's on our beaches and in our oceans. And it's just everywhere. So I think it comes down to a real change of consciousness, which only people like you and me, writers, are artists. This depends an awful lot on us coming and changing the perception of what it means to be human, and that changes reality. And I want to, there's so many examples, and just one that I'll quote, which is, I grew up in New England. My family goes back to the 1600s, and I was always fascinated by U.S. history. And one thing in particular, that in 1773, 1774, everybody in America believed that the British were invincible. Well, we can't go to war with mighty England. It's the strongest army in the world. They're invincible. Well, George Washington.
You see those jackets? We could never make jackets like that.
The drip, at least.
Yeah, and we certainly can't make tea, anyway. But then George Washington remembered that 20 years earlier in the French and Indian War, which, as it turns out, I live on the West Coast now, people on the West Coast haven't even heard of the French and Indian War, and yet it was pivotal. There'd be no Revolutionary War were it not for the French and Indian War. Anyway, in the 1750s and early 60s, in the French and Indian War, there was this huge army under General Braddock, the British Army, the biggest British army in the Americas under their best general, was marching on a French establishment, which would later become Pittsburgh, through the Monongahela Valley. And George Washington was there. The crack British army, huge British army, and totally defeated by a handful of French and Indians. And Braddock was killed. Most all of his generals were killed. Washington wasn't killed because he had dysentery and was at the back of the line in a stretcher. And he rallied himself to help the retreat, but he missed the big action in the front, so he survived. But he remembered in 1774, 1775, he stood before Continental Congress and he said, "The British aren't invincible. All we got to do is hide behind trees." Change of perception. And it changed actions and it changed reality. And that's exactly what the colonists did, and they hid behind trees and behind stone fences. Mm-hmm. And it was a change of perception. And we see Martin Luther King Jr. doing that. We see Rosa Parks doing that. We see, throughout history, we've had these examples of people who had just turned things around. And Milton Friedman did that in the other direction. He took us deeper and deeper into this death economy by creating this perception that the only responsibility of business is to maximize short-term profits, regardless of the social and environmental cost. He promoted that, and people around the world bought into it. Leaders around the world bought into it, and that changed everything. But it was a change of perception that changed reality. So we can do that in the opposite direction, and that's what we're doing. That's what you guys are doing. That's what we're speaking out on, and it takes the voices to make that happen.
I had a different question, but I'm so intrigued with where we are about this notion of actually harnessing real material power through the shifting of collective consciousness and perception. In this notion of innovation or imagination or pulling from a historical analog to then, hide in the proverbial trees. And I'm just curious for you, as someone who uses that analogy, what do you see the trees being right now? Or where are you seeing trees that are available to hide or behind or be fugitive or ambush metaphorically speaking, or not so metaphorically speaking, the system that seems so much bigger than how the British Army loomed a few centuries ago.
Well, I think it's a philosophy that I do hear from a number of young people.
Mm-hmm.
On this last trip I did to the Amazon, there were two teenage girls. Well, one was 21 and one was 18. They were sisters, and I have a 16-year-old grandson who lives 10 minutes from me. And I hang out with young people like this, and I see that they have, at least the ones I'm talking about, have a different mindset. And I see this among the youth of Latin America, where I spend a lot of time. I speak Spanish. I talk to a lot of younger people there. That they've kind of given up on this idea of materialism. They see that college is not going to college, getting a degree, and then working for a big corporation doesn't guarantee you anything anymore. When I was young, that's what you did. If you went
That
to
was
college,
the ideal to strive towards.
yeah, and you were going to get everything. You were going to get a pension. You were going to get insurance. You're going to get all these things, and they don't see that, and therefore they're looking at alternatives. And I think what's important for us is to encourage them to continue to look for the alternatives. I can talk about the philosophy behind all this. At my point in life, I'm not prepared to tell them what route to take, how to make this happen. But the important thing is the perception. And for me to say, listen, when I was an economic hitman, and my generation has sold the world a faulty perception. And it may have worked for a while, and it's created amazing science, amazing technology. I have this pacemaker now because of some of those things. So it's not a system to say we failed. It's a system to say it's gone too far. It's time to change.
I look at it dialectically.
Yeah, we've got to change it, and let's not fault the past. Let's not worry about that. Where did we make our mistakes? Let's just understand.
I got a little bit of smoke for the past. The past was kind of also bullshit a little bit. I mean, we can move on and we can, be mature about this, but I got a little bit of beef with the past.
But the only way to confront that jaguar, to touch that beast, Damon, is to change the present and the future.
Yes.
That's how you get even. That's how you get even with the past. Change the present and the future. I have a bad past. Sometimes people say, "Don't you feel really guilty?" And no, I don't feel. I've given up on that. I remember I had a meeting with the Dalai Lama a number of years ago. I took a group of people. We spent an afternoon with him, a small group, and
big flex. I said big flex. That's quite the name drop. All right.
Oh, I didn't mean it.
I spent the afternoon with my niece. You were here with the Dalai Lama.
I didn't mean it that way, but it's actually a funny story. It all happened by accident. Actually, it all happened by accident. But it's another story. But anyway, one of the people asked him, do you regret leaving Tibet? Do you regret the fact that Chinese took over Tibet? He said, regrets are just a pure waste of time. Don't ever regret the past. Learn from it and be inspired to move into a new future. And I think that's, a very wise statement from a very wise man who certainly has suffered a lot and did have to leave his homeland and see his homeland brutalized by the Chinese. And he said, no, don't regret it. Don't even blame the Chinese. Let's change things. Let's use that as our motivating force.
I think that's beautiful. And I see you embody so much of the, in the practice of confessional and of naming yourself as having held that position, what that makes possible in order to then not be consumed by whether that's regret or guilt or shifting away from accountability. Like to say, hey, this is a role that I served. This is a seat I sat in. This is who I was. And now what do I do with that? I think it makes your work impactful for other people. At least for me, it's part of what makes it resonate. You're not saying, hey, look what they're doing over there. You're saying, hey, look what I did. But I'm wondering for you, it sounds like you're at a point where there's a comfort with that. But what that trajectory was to feel like, hey, this is a thing that I need to be able to hold in the world and then try to make something with.
I think I don't know that I know the answer to that question.
Let me see if I can get a little more specific. In the time between holding that role and then writing the experience and then sharing that with the world, like, how did you come to, what was helpful in feeling like
Oh,
I can tell this story in a way that might actually like be beneficial for me to be more fully integrated as a person too?
yeah. So basically, if I talk in detail in the books about how I was basically uh, threatened and bribed not to write what became Confessions of an Economic Hitman a number of years before it came
Okay.
out.
Okay.
And that's a long story, but it
No,
was both.
that's my question. How are you able to talk about this shit?
Yeah. Yeah, well, when I started when I started to write the book after I quit, I contacted other economic hitmen and jackals and wanted to include their stories, and immediately I got anonymous phone calls threatening my life and that of my infant daughter.
Mm.
And then and I was terrified because I knew what these people can do. They're serious. I
Yeah.
knew that.
These are murderers, like maybe not the specific people you're talking to, but the
Yeah.
contingency at large.
The jackals, and I knew some of them personally, not the ones that were calling me, I don't think, but I had contact with them, and um, at the same time, I got taken out to dinner by the president of Stone and Webster Engineering Corporation, a huge company in Boston that had been a rival of ours and my company's, and he said, you have a great resume. We'd like to use it in our proposals. You're chief economist at one of our rivals. If you left there, you don't have to do any work for us, but just use your resume. And I'm prepared to write you a check for $500,000 tomorrow morning. This was in the late '80s.
Mm.
And that, I'm like, oh wow, I quit my job. I don't have a job. My life's being threatened, and maybe this is the way out. And then he says, just don't write the book. So I'm getting what I sold to presidents of countries, like, here, accept all this money, or
Right.
so, I took the money, and I didn't buy fancy cars or big mansion. I went back to the Amazon where I'd been a Peace Corps volunteer, where they'd saved my life. And I said, I want to help you guys save your rainforest. What can I do? And that's when they said, well, you got to change the dream of your people. So then I came back and formed a nonprofit called Dream Change, and later Pachamama Alliance. And I wrote 5 books on shamanism. They were happy to have me write books about that, as long as they didn't write the book. And so I really, I created this new life. But in the process, I was learning a lot more from these indigenous people about the importance of spreading the message, about the importance of using perception to change reality. So I've devoted the rest of my life in my small way to writing and speaking out, and I formed a couple of nonprofits. I'm on their boards. I don't try to manage them. I've moved. I don't want to have anything to do with managing businesses anymore, but I do want to speak out and write. So I've seen that as my role. And these indigenous people are just with them again a couple of weeks ago. And again, they continue to encourage me, keep doing this, keep writing these stories. And they pass more stories on to me. So that really turned me around, at understanding that. And then, but when 9/11 happened, my contract with Stone and Webster was over, and I was in the Amazon on 9/11. When I came home, I flew to Ground Zero, and as I stood there looking into that pit, I knew I had to tell the story, my story. But I decided this time I wouldn't contact anyone else. I wouldn't let anyone know I was writing it. I'd do it completely in secret. I'd write it as a personal confession, where I didn't have to contact anyone else. And I figured once I get it into the hands of an agent and it goes out to publishers, it's my best insurance policy. Because anyone who would want to get rid of me, not have me tell this story, once publishers have the story, knows that if something strange happens to me, it's going to sell a lot of books. So,
Cool.
yeah,
It's not that they could get away with it; it's that it would make you more popular.
yeah, I'd be a martyr. I'd be a martyr, and
Yeah.
people would buy the book.
So really, it was that notion of perception that you see as like the protective barrier.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And they would perceive me as a greater threat if I were dead. Once the book's written and out there,
Mhm.
the perception is I'm a bigger threat dead than alive.
All right.
I have just one quick follow. What was it about seeing Ground Zero that made that crystallize for you?
Go on.
A deep emotion, no direct connection. I wasn't looking at, well, who caused this? Am I part of that system? I was looking at, well, when we were in the Amazon, we had a two-way radio, and we heard that this had happened, and the indigenous people immediately told us, well, we feel really sorry for you. We're going to do some ceremonies to help you and your people. But we also hope that you'll understand that what's happening to you is what we used to always having happen to us. Invaders have been invading our territory for a long time. We hope you'll understand and be able to see from our direction. And by the time I get to the States, and I was driving home after landing at the airport, and I'm listening to the radio, and I'm realizing that we're not getting it at all. What we're doing is talking about who can we attack. Is it Afghanistan or Iraq? Who are we going to attack? Who are we going to blame for this? So we're not to blame, and of course we're not. I mean, it's a horrible tragedy. I'm not, not negating that in the least bit. But what I am saying is that by the time I got to Ground Zero, I was aware that we weren't really delving deep into our own shadowy past, and that maybe I could help us look into our shadowy past. And again, not that there was any direct connection between 9/11 and that. It brought up these deep emotions, and it probably was somewhat connected with the fact I'd just been in the Amazon and heard indigenous people say this, and then there I am looking at this pit, and you can still smell the smoke. And it was a crazy place at that moment in New York. It was just not long after what had happened, and it just deeply, deeply impacted me. I just said, "Hey, I got to write the book.
Yeah.
I got to confess."
Yeah. And it does make sense, actually. I hear what you're saying if you're not claiming to directly be explaining the 9/11 event, but the phenomenon is birthed out of the geopolitical context that
Yeah.
you're talking about. And so that is really interesting. And as you were telling that story, I could like kind of see you there, and understand how that shift made. I know we gotta be thoughtful of your time. This is kind of a personal question as we are running out, but you're talking about getting to this moment of like getting the information out and being a protective barrier and perception, and how things kind of are above ground and underground in terms of how people receive information. And I just want to name the space where I first came across you and just get your like opinion on the legacy of it, because it's kind of remained underground. It's something I kind of like talk about in whispers. But I learned about you in college through you participated in the Zeitgeist series, and I would say the second edition really based its whole framework a lot around your work. And so I'm just like, for you, 15 years or so later, how does that piece as being a way to like kind of communicate your ideas to the world hold up or land for you all this time later?
I just keep going. It was Bob Dylan. I remember one time seeing an interview with him, and he said, "Hey, I don't. Once I cut a record, I don't listen to that music ever. I don't want to be held back by it.
Does it come up though for people a lot for you? Do people say like, I saw you in that?
Yeah, and that's great. You just said it, fine. But here we are. We're talking now, and this is now. This is more important. That was 15 years ago, whenever the hell it was, and this is now. And things have changed a lot since then too.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the time we're in right now. My God, look at what the presidential elections in this country. What's going on in China? What's going on in Russia? What's going on in Ecuador? What's going on in Latin America? What's going on in Africa? What's going on in Israel and in Palestine? What's going on in Ukraine? I mean, we're at this amazing pivotal moment, and it's really important that we look at it. And incidentally, I got another book that's going to be coming out in a couple of months probably, which I'm actually going to self-publish this one. I've been published by Penguin and Random House and a lot of the big names, but I want to do the self-publishing thing this time. I don't want to go through that process. And it's a novel, and I've never published a novel before, because I want to reach, and it's on the same subjects, and it takes place in Central America. And it's called Message from Pleiades, the seven sisters, the stars. It gets into some pretty woo-woo stuff in a way. But, but it's the same message ultimately. And I want to reach an audience that I know there's a lot of people that never read nonfiction like what I write. I want to reach them. And I've really enjoyed it. Since I was a kid, I wanted to be a novelist. And I never, I just, so
Yeah.
it's a lot of fun, like what the hell's the point of life if you don't have fun every minute? Well, you gotta, when you cook a good meal or eat a good meal, you gotta wash the dishes, right? I mean, there's,
Right.
you write something you left to write, and then you gotta go in and do the little nitty gritty of dotting the I's and crossing the T's and so forth. But I've just really, really enjoyed this. And I got to say, I feel very, very privileged to be alive at this moment, to be on this show with you guys, to know that we are at the cusp, and we are at the spearhead of a consciousness movement. There's no question about it. Will it work? Will it take over? We don't know. One never knows. And historically, you look at revolutions, some have failed, a lot have failed, and a lot have succeeded. So, but what we do know is that we can have fun moving forward. I'm sure George Washington had fun, and I think Sam Adams and
Oh yeah, they had their fair share. That's probably the thing
I
we
think
probably
Tom,
diverged the most. I'm not
Yeah.
as big a Washington fan as you are. He did all right, to say the least.
actually, my mentor in that regard would be Tom Paine, who wrote the
Yeah.
pamphlets that's inspired everybody. Because I'm not a general, I'm not a politician, I'm a writer. Washington was a good analogy as far as just that one thing about changing. But I think Tom Paine must have had a hell of a lot of fun being the revolutionary that he was and standing up to the authorities. And, in the end, Washington hated him. Washington had been his friend, and in the end hated him. And I have a feeling that Paine loved that fact.
And I have a feeling you do too.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to be hated. You guys
No,
don't,
not
you
hated.
guys don't hate me, do you?
No.
No, not
No, I
at
don't
all.
know. No, this
But that the people who hold that power, even if
yeah,
there was a moment of alignment, now that's
yeah.
not the joy in knowing that that's not who you are, or that's
Yeah.
not who you see that they see you as.
I know there are people who have tried to kill me. I
Mm.
spent a lot of time in the hospital because I was poisoned and came out of it. And so there are people who hate me. I don't. That's the point. Is that whatever we're doing, we need to really enjoy doing it. I like to tell people that here. Let's. Can I take a few more minutes? I can.
Yeah, we're here. We're
Okay.
here.
So when people ask me what can I do personally, I like to tell people, and I write about this in the more recent books, 5 questions. Ask yourself 5 questions. What do I most want to do for the rest of my life? And I would answer that by saying I want to write. I love to write. You guys would probably say you want to keep doing podcasts and films. I have a friend who's a carpenter, and he'd say, I want to work with my hands in wood. Come the opposite end of the spectrum. Second question, how do I do that in a way that helps to transform the death economy to a life economy? I would say, I'm going to write about these things. I want to inspire people through my writing to do this. He would say, I'm only going to use sustainable wood, and I'm going to plant a tree for every tree of the wood that I use. And the third question is, what's stopping you? What's the jaguar standing in your path? What's keeping you from doing this? And as a writer, I might say, oh, I just don't have time. I know I need to write for at least 2 hours every day if I want to be a successful writer. I don't have time. I might say that. And my friend might say, well, people don't want to pay the extra price for sustainable woods or to get me to plant trees. That's the jaguar. Fourth question, when you touch that jaguar, what changes? So I'd say, oh, well, hey, I could turn off the television for 2 hours every night and write, or get up a little earlier and write. And my carpenter friend would say, well, I can tell my clients that the extra price is not a cost, it's an investment in the future for them and the children and future generations. And then the fifth question is, what's the next step I take? The writer, well, what do I want to write about? and the cabinet, well, I'm going to build this cabinet here using sustainable materials and tell the people that they're investing in the future. And I think every one of us can ask those questions. It doesn't matter whether you're a parent or a child or a student or a teacher or a plumber or a doctor or a lawyer or a welder or a carpenter, whatever the heck you are. You can ask those questions, and we can all participate in this revolution by doing what we most want to do for the rest of our lives, and doing it in a way that helps to transform the death economy to a life economy. And right now I'm being attacked by a jaguar.
Yeah, your little mini jaguar. Hey, what's up, Betty?
Steve says, I want to get in on this. I
Yeah,
like these stories.
Absolutely.
can we get those 5 questions just right back
Get in on this.
in a
I like
row?
those questions. I've heard those questions before.
Could you say them just one more time?
Yeah.
So what do I
just so we have them in synopsis?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
what do I most want to do for the rest of my life? What will bring me the greatest satisfaction? Okay.
Mhm.
2, how do I do this in a way that helps transform the death economy to a life economy? 3,
Mhm.
what's stopping me? What's the voice? Who's telling me I'm not good enough? I'm not smart enough. I'm not tall enough. I'm not short enough. I'm not the right gender. I don't have enough education. I have too much education. Whatever. What's stopping you from doing that? That's number 3. What's stopping you? Number 4. So that's the jaguar that's standing in your path, stopping you. You can't do this. You're not good. Exactly. Watch you. My jaguar's going to attack me if you keep.
All right. I'll ease up.
He's still here. He's like, wait a minute. I heard that. He's a little angry.
4.
And 4 is when you touch that jaguar, how does it change your perception? How does it help you change your perception to know that you can break through that barrier? You don't have to listen to that voice anymore. And 5 is, okay, so what action do I take? Now that I have a new perception, what action do I take? And when you take that action, it'll change your reality. So, what do I most want to do? How do I do it in a way that helps transform the death to a life economy? What's stopping me when I confront that barrier? If you run from a jaguar, it chases you. But visually, at least in visualization, if you touch it, it gives you power. You don't really want to touch a real jaguar, unless they're little like this one.
Not even with the kayak paddle,
Oh, no. But in the shamanic vision, you want to touch the jaguar. And then 5, what actions do I take? And, the last 3, the answers to the last 3 questions will frequently change. So I suggest to people, ask yourself these 5 questions frequently. You can do it in 3 minutes in the morning while lying in bed. And the first 2 questions may not change, or it may take a while for them to change. What do I most want to do? How do I do it in a way to transform the death to a life economy? The last 3 will constantly change. So once you've touched the jaguar, you've identified the jaguar, I don't have enough time to write, oh yeah, I can take 2 hours. Okay, now the next one that's stopping me is, well, I don't really have anything to say. All right, well, what can I write about? And so on. So I think reviewing especially those last 3 questions, what's stopping me? What happens when I touch that jaguar, and what actions do I take? And need to be addressed fairly frequently because they'll keep changing. Once I've decided to write a book, I got to then figure out what's the first sentence, then what's the next sentence, and so on. Yeah.
But there's a joy, and I think at least for me, like a comfort that comes from using that muscle, and each time you figure out an answer to it of like, what's the next thing I do? It makes it a lot easier to trust yourself to be able to figure it out the next time.
Yes, exactly. And you can see that the jaguar is now at rest.
We did it.
He says, yes, this is exactly what we needed. We just need to be and do what we most do.
Oh, one thing before I know you're about to. If we have any gas, we can offer. But I just wanted to let you know, I just did a quick Google of the historical sketches, and you kind of got some Thomas Paine going on in the face a little bit. You got a little
if you're doing impersonations, you feel like you could do some recreating.
If time travel happened, you could fit right on into that Revolutionary War period. You got a real 18th century face.
Yeah. Maybe I'm a reincarnation.
Yeah. There you go.
Just remember,
right,
David, next time I'm invited to do something like this, you're going to reincarnate as me.
Okay.
Speaking of rest, I wanna make sure we're thoughtful of your time and energy. Thank you so much for being here with us. How can people find you and your work in the ways you would like to be found?
Just go to johnperkins.org, and I do take these trips. I've got the January one to the Amazon's full, but there's one to the Mayan people, which is incredible because the Mayan people have so much to teach us in in the forests of Central America. Beautiful Tikal. So I encourage people to come join me, but also just my books and all that information is johnperkins.org. And so that'd probably be that's the simplest, johnperkins.org. I'm not a comm. I'm an orgasm.
That's hot.
Maybe I'm just organic. That's what it is.
Just an org. Just an org. That organism. I like that.
Organism. Yeah, please, check out John's work. Definitely check out Confessions of an Economic Hitman, and really just like do a quick Google or YouTube search. We want to go like deeper into some of the ideas or learnings that have developed, but I want folks, we kind of skim over the story. And so for folks who are interested in learning about, how imperialism and the corporatocracy has taken over the world, has interfered with democracy, and, start to get into that path of doing that perception shifting, really encourage folks to go into the John Perkins rabbit hole, because it has definitely served Daniel and I well.
It got us here.
Rabbit hole.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you.
Appreciate
so much
you. We'll be back.
You dear. Let's do it again.
Yep.
Absolutely. Hold on just 1 second before you get off. I gotta stop.